What's up, man? How you doing?
So dark in here, isn't it? It's very dark in this room. Oh, look at the Wicked Witch of the West. Wow. Bring on your whole life. Let's show where we go. Who makes you? I was trying to find some gold paint. I thought I had some gold paint somewhere, but I couldn't find it, and my space is just getting more and more cramped over here. So I'm door dashing as usual. What time is it? Like 11 o'clock at night. Oh, so the $3 extra just ended. I had this brilliant idea. I have some canvases, old canvases of paintings that I found, and I'm gonna paint. I'm not gonna tell you guys because my boyfriend said that I could probably make that my thing. You know, like everybody, artists have their thing. I have my thing. I don't want anyone to steal it, so I got to figure out how to make it my thing before I share it.
I can write though, but what's fucked up is that I actually don't write by writing. I write by speaking. That's one of the things I'm gonna do for a couple of my books. I'm just gonna write the whole book, and
these fingers,
ChatGPT
these fingers. I know that there's
grammatically correct it, but retain the syntax because I ain't trying to change my expression. But that's actually something that I need to get back to doing. There was a couple of books.
What up, dog? What up, dog? Oh, what is that? Pointy one, huh? Ah, did you point it? Make it pointy? Oh, you're such a sweetheart. It came like that. The dog chewed it up like that. That's what I'm saying. You made it. Look at it. You made me a paintbrush.
You got a picture?
Actually,
Nice and pointy. All right. Excellent. Well, I appreciate it. It looks great.
That was a really shitty, just little brush that I found.
Love
And
it.
if I had something, a better brush to work with, I could make you a beautiful pointy brush.
You need another brush?
Well, you got one, give me one that's already sort of beat up, that has good inner bristles. That's all I need.
How about this one?
But just one, you know, I mean, you know, it needs to be one that's sort of, yeah. Well, which one?
Either of them.
That one looks like it's still.
Silver,
I mean, this,
right,
yeah.
this one
I mean, this one's a good candidate right
I
here.
hate that. Yeah, that one
It's
I
a good
hate.
candidate.
I was going to throw that one away.
This one's perfect for doing it because all the side stuff will be gone and it'll be pointy. Yeah. But you see that?
What time is it in the UK right now? It's 11, 12, 1, 2,
time
3,
is it now?
4. It's 5 a.m. there.
Yeah.
Shams is
You
sleeping.
see that though?
My Shamsies is
See
sleeping.
it, right?
Better be sleeping anyway. I'm on live. Yeah, that's my new one.
It's a good one.
That's a new one. That's
It's
my
a
new
good-
one.
it's a
Yeah, I'm
good
going
one.
to try it as soon as you walk away.
It's a good one.
Just breaking stuff
Maybe
out.
I'll get some nice fine shit.
Yeah, I was just
I'll make this one.
turning the white on and getting my thing
I'll make this one
going.
too.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
I
Thank
gotta-
you.
I don't just point, make them like how most people would make them pointy. I gotta.
I didn't get any jobs because they were paying $3 extra an hour.
Oh, that's because other people are out there.
Not an hour, but yeah, well, I'm waiting.
Yeah,
So
well, other people are out there.
I'm gonna paint for my peeps or no one. Remember, I am up and coming. Next, live, Bob Ross in my real hair and my real teeth. No plastic surgery. Oh, nothing. I'm talking to my people. Done. My dash just ended. Let me see.
What do you gotta do for verification? Just prove your identity. Because if I can just prove my identity, then I'm more willing to get on the app. Now I'm happy to get on the app. I think I was pissed off if I do, and I'm not gonna be able to upload my own videos. Excuse me. What does that even mean? Pay to be verified, not sure. Alright, so I'm gonna have to figure out how much it costs, if it does cost money, and then go from there.
54. I need to make 54, 38 more dollars. $58.34 more to pay that. Oh God, I really, really, really super duper hate money. I just hate it.
After I go to bed, usually for about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes, this has been a
I'm listening to Alive, a friend. He's very cool. I like him a lot. He's got quite the following, and he decided to follow me tonight because I am so gregarious and fun to talk to, even though I never have anyone in here these late nights. Being a whack job today. So, anyway, I wanted to tell you guys. I mean, I might have told you earlier, but I applied for that post office position. I was so excited because, working for the government. Everybody wants to work for the government, right? Anyway, stupid job doesn't give any benefits. It's no good. It's no good. It's no good. Yes, it sure is. Content for TikTok. I just heard a curse. Anyway, I'm just being crazy. It's late night, and I am here. When I left earlier, we were discussing Saturday Night Live, Gilda Radner, how she's my favorite famous person of all time. I wanted to get David to 10,000 likes. Oh, that's what I wanted to know. Would you guys listen to me? I am going to start reading literature, okay? I am going to pick some stuff and I'm going to start reading to you guys because I really love to read. So let's practice and find something simple, okay? I have the Baca La Vida. I'll move over to the little puffy one. Little puffy baby puppies. Little puffy baby puppies. Yeah, we was reading The Power of Positive Thinking. I have a lot of old books. Have you guys ever heard of Pride and Prejudice? Let's see how this goes. I'll read a couple pages of this and see if anybody listens to me. So, Pride and Prejudice was published by the World Publishing Company back in 1946. So, give them the credit and kudos. I am going to read to my little piece of friends. How this book came to be written by Mary Lamberton Becker. Every now and then, somebody brings up that old question of which half-dozen books you would like to have. I'm going to make David be quiet because he's. Tell him good night, David. Good night, David. Good night, TikTok. I'm reading Pride and Prejudice.
It's gonna be crazy when I look back at this shit in a year. I got like 700 fucking videos on YouTube. So what's 700 times 700? 1,004. Actually, how many minutes is that? Like, what the hell is going on, man? That's a lot of goddamn content. Let me see. What's 700 times 700? Holy shit, 4? Dude, look at that, guys. That's a lot of goddamn content. That kind of scares me. Damn, I kind of feel violated. Like, knowing that's going to happen. Like, people are going to be able to just, like, do this to me. Like, witness me like this. Are you allowed to say dollars? You're live on YouTube right now? Reading Pride and Prejudice on my YouTube channel? God, I got to sub to your YouTube channel. Let me see if I can get over there. I gotta wait till after live, but I'll check your shit out, definitely.
So anyway, I told David that I was reading Pride and Prejudice, and this is our experiment, just our late night experiment. I'm reading you guys your bedtime story for tonight, okay? And then maybe cuckoo Michelle.
Somebody got snuck by a dude. Damn. I'm sorry to hear that.
I don't want my hair all up in my shit, right? I don't want my hair all up in my shit. So I'm going to read you guys a bedtime novel. We'll do it every night for the next few weeks.
Because I got punched in the nose, and then again, the reason I got punched in the nose is because I tried to steal somebody's bike, and I didn't tell anybody because I was like, dude, they're going to tell me you deserve that shit. It's a learning experience, man. Learning experience, rolling with the wrong crowd. I don't know why the fuck I wanted to steal that bike anyway. I think I just wanted to do it because I didn't have anything better to do. Oh, shit. Don't be a pocket this. Pocket what?
Hot Pockets.
IFG.
All right, guys.
See you up in here, man.
Let's make this
Looking for a bite to
some
steal
better
right now.
ambiance.
That's what we're doing.
I should get the candles out. We'll bring out the candles.
I kind of wish I could instantly heat my coffee up right now.
Me too. I told you to get a microwave in the basement.
Commercial break. Alright, we're gonna do a commercial break right now, guys. I'll be right back here.
That's right. That's a good color for a bedtime story. I will do candles next time. How about that? All right.
Which one should I play?
Candles. All right, guys. So
I kind of don't
let's
like
get
this beat,
started.
but
Every now and then, somebody brings up that old question of which half dozen books you would like to have with you if you were cast up on a desert island. You begin with the Bible, of course, and that leaves you 5 more to choose. Though I dislike being restricted to so few, I have long since had my list ready. In the edition that I have owned for years, the 6 novels of Jane Austen are printed in 5 volumes, and these are the 5 that I would want to have with me on my desert island. Whenever the painters come and all my bookcases must be shrouded in sailcloth, I take out these 5 books before the men get to work, for there is the chance that some night while the books are under cover, I might be overtired and weary, and then I need the relaxation and comfort of a few moments in the society of Jane Austen's people. Opening a Jane Austen novel is entering a tight little world where you may have money, but you must have manners, where the Napoleonic War may be going on somewhere outside, but the rhyme of an established social life is undisturbed. Not all her people are intelligent indeed. I confess to special delight in some of her borers. Mr. Collins, the perfect specimen of bore in The Pride and Prejudice, or Miss Bates in Emma, whose long-distance record in sentences run to 2 full pages, unimpeded by more than dashes and an occasional comma. Sounds like my writing. Yet my copy of Emma falls open of itself at this speech and the account of the party at which it was uttered. Miss Norris in Mansfield Park is a tyrannical old cat, but as I need not meet her in person, I do love to hear her expose herself in conversation. These people use an English so charming, you long to bring back to their true meaning of some of the words they use, to make elegant again a word meaning grace and refinement, and not the over-meaning word adjective, an adjective. Now I can't even say it. Forget it. We'll move on. We use today as good or first rate to make candor one more an honest word for justice and fairness, rather tactful truth-telling. All Jane Austen's heroines are better than perfect. They are deliciously human. Where you begin with Elizabeth Bennet of Pride and Prejudice, you start at the top. I say this with a slight feeling of disloyalty to my friend Emma in the novel named for her, to dear Anne Elliot in Persuasion, and to Eleanor and Marianne of Sense and Sensibility. But, after all, there's only one Elizabeth Bennet. I like to think that Jane Austen herself was all unconsciously drawing something very like her own portrait in Lizzie, and of one thing we can be sure, that in Jane, the eldest Miss Bennet, the essential traits of character are those of Miss Austen's sister, Cassandra. Lizzie's lovingly admiration of Jane's qualities is very same the author shows in her letters to her own dear devoted sister. I have never tried to identify Darcy. He is to me the hero of the most amazing proposal of all marriages in the 19th century fiction. Jane Austen was a true artist at creating proposal scenes, and she must have had several on her own account, but none of them were ever accepted. With no other name than the one she started with. Her own story could have been told in a few words. She lived at a time, she was born in 1775, when a lady was happy to have no history, and before the camera was invented. I don't too much regret that we have so little to go by in ways of portraiture, for we can see Jane through descriptions of her friends as graceful, with laughing eyes and regular features, loving a dance and wearing uncommonly pretty clothes, finding fun in almost everything, but never poking fun at anyone, writing her novels, which she herself compared to scraps of ivory on which the design is painted with a tiny brush. Right in the family living room with, they say, a bit of sewing or embroidery ready to lay over the paper should a visitor come in. Born at Stevenson, Hampshire, England, where her father was rector, she went with the family to Bath when he retired, and after his death, first to Southampton and then to the village of Chatham in the south of England, till her health, gently and too early declining, made it necessary to go to Winchester for medical aid. There, Cassandra, close to her sister's eyes after long pain borne, with unfailing sweetness, she laughed to the last in her own delightful way. Almost her last written words are recorded in a letter that say, "You will find Captain, a very respectable, well-meaning man, without much manner, his wife and his sister, all good humor and oblongness, and I hope, since the fashion allowed it, with rather large petticoats than last year." Elizabeth Curlin was born in Canada in 1913. His family migrated to the United States when he was 11 and settled in Detroit, where Edgar went through grade school, high school, 2 years at the Wicker School of Fine Arts, and a year at the Society of Arts and Crafts. Suddenly came the Depression. He learned the trade of sign painter the hard way and spent the next 6 years wandering about the country in an old Ford, preaching his trade. He says he earned just about enough to keep my slim bones together and had a series of experiences in doing it that seemed very amusing now, but weren't at the time. Sounds like my life. In 1936, he reached New York, but weren't at the time. In 1936, Union School of Arts, where he says 5 years later, they breathrened a sigh of relief and handed me a diploma. He then teaches there as often as he can, finds time for doing innumerable book jackets and illustrations. Oddly enough, from this tough and difficult experience has emerged the delicate, polished, haughty, and highly mannered style that distinguishes his books decorated with drawings, Pride and Prejudice. It is true, universally acknowledged, that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. However little known the feelings or views of such a man may be on his first entering a neighborhood, this truth is so well fixed in the minds of the surrounding families that he is considered as a rightful property of someone or other of their daughters. "My dear Mr. Bennet," said his lady to him one day, "have you heard that Netherfield Park is let at last?" Mr. Bennet replied that he had not. "But it is," returned she, "for Mrs. Long has just been here, and she told me all about it." Miss Bennet made no answer. Mr. Bennet, excuse me. Mr. Bennet made no answer. "Do you not want to know who has taken it?" cried his wife impatiently. You want to tell me, and I have no objection to hearing it." This was invitation enough. "Why, my dear, you must know. Mrs. Long says that Netherfield is taken by a young man of large fortune from the northern of England. There he came down on Monday in a Oh my God, I got stuck again. Um, Mrs. Long says that Netherfield is taken by a young man of large fortune from the north of England, that he came down on Monday in a chaise and four to see the place, and was so much delighted with it that he agreed with Mr. Morris immediately that he is to take possession before Michael Mass, and some of his servants are to be in the house by the end of the week. What is his name? Question mark. Bingley, is he married or single? Oh, single, my dear, to be sure. A single man of large fortune, 4 or 5 thousand a year. What a fine thing for our girls. How so? How can it affect them? My dear Mr. Bennet, replied his wife, how can you be so tiresome? You must know that I'm thinking of him marrying one of them. Is that his design in settling here? Design nonsense. How can you talk so? But it is very likely that he may fall in love with one of them, and therefore you must visit him as soon as he comes. I see no occasion for that. You and the girls may go, or you may send them by themselves, which perhaps will be still better, for as you are as handsome as any of them, Mr. Bingley might like you the best of the pastry. My dear, you flatter me. I certainly have had my share of beauty, but I do not pretend to be anything extraordinary now. When a woman has 5 grown-up daughters, she ought to give over thinking of her own beauty. In such cases, a woman has not often much beauty to think of. But, my dear, you must indeed go and see Mr. Bingley when he comes into the neighborhood. It is more than I engaged for, I assure you. But consider your daughters. Only think what an establishment it would be for one of them. Sir William and Lady Lucas are determined to go, merely on that account, for in general, you know, they visit no newcomers. Indeed, you must go, for it will be impossible for us to visit him if you do not. You are over scrupulous, surely, I dare say, Mr. Bingley, with a big glad to see you. I will send a few lines by you to assure him of my hearty consent to him marrying whichever he chooses of the girls, though I must throw in a good word for my Lizzie. I desire you will do no such thing. Lizzie is not a bit better than the others, and I am sure she is not half so handsome as Jane, nor half as good-humored as Lydia. But you are always giving her the preference. They have none of them much to recommend them, replied he. They are all silly and ignorant like other girls. But Lizzie has something more of quickness than her sisters. Mr. Bennet, how can you abuse your own children in such a way? You take delight in vexing me. You have no compassion on my poor nerves. You mistake me, my dear. I have a high respect for your nerves. They are my old friends. I have heard you mention them with consideration these 20 years at least. Ha! You do not know what I suffer, but I hope you will go get over it and live to see many young men of 4,000 a year come into the neighborhood. It will be no use to us if 20 such should come, since you will not visit them. Depend upon it, my dear, that when there are 20, I will visit them all. Mr. Bennet was so odd, a mixture of quick parts, sarcastic humor, reserve, and caprice, that the experience of 23 had been insufficient to make his wife understand his character. Her mind was left difficult to develop. She was a woman of meaning, understanding, little information, and uncertain temper. When she was discontented, she fancied herself nervous. The business of her life was to get her daughters married. Insolence was visiting and news. Mr. Bennet, Chapter 2, Pride and Prejudice. Mr. Bennet was among the earliest of those who waited on Mr. Bingley. He had always intended to visit him, though to the last always assuring his wife that he should not go until the evening after the visit was paid. She had no knowledge of it. It was then disclosed in the following manner. Observing his second daughter employed in trimming a hat, he suddenly addressed her with, I hope Mr. Bingley will like it, Lizzie. We are not in a way to know what Mr. Bingley likes, said her mother resentfully, since we are not to visit. But you forget, mamma, said Elizabeth, that we shall meet him at the assemblies, and that Mrs. Long has promised to introduce him. I do not believe Miss Long will do any such thing. She has 2 nieces of her own. She is a selfish, hypocritical woman, and I have no opinion of her. No more have I, said Mr. Bennet, and I am glad to find that you do not depend on her serving you. Mrs. Bennet designed not to make any reply, but unable to contain herself, began scolding one of her daughters. Don't keep coughing so, Kitty, for heaven's sake. Have a little compassion on my nerves. You tear them to parts. Kitty had no discertin in her cough, said her father. She times them ill. I do not cough for my own amusement, replied Kitty fretfully. When is your next ball to be, Lizzie? Tomorrow, fourth night. So it is, cried her mother, and Miss Long does not come back till the day before, so it will be impossible for her to introduce him, for she will not know him herself. Then, my dear, you may have the advantage for your friend to introduce Mr. Bigley to her. Impossible, Mr. Bennet. Impossible. When I am not acquainted with him myself, how can you be so teasing? I honor your circumspection. A fortnight acquaintance is certainly very little. One cannot know what a man really is by the end of a fortnight. But if we do not venture, somebody else will. And after all, Mrs. Long and her niece must stand their chance, and therefore, as she will think it an act of kindness if you decline the office, I will take it on myself. The girls staring at their father, Mrs. Bennet said only, nonsense, nonsense. What can be meaning of that emphatic exclamation? Cried he. Do you consider the forms of introduction and the stress that is laid on them as nonsense? I cannot quite agree with you there. Why, you say you, Mary? For you are a young lady of deep reflection, I know, and read great books and make extractions. Mary, wishing to say something very sensible, but knew nothing now how. While Mary is adjusting her ideas, he continued, let us return to Mr. Bigley. I am sick of Mr. Bigley, cried his wife. I am sorry to hear that, but why did you not tell me before? If I had known as much this morning, I certainly would not have called on him. It is very unlucky, but as I actually paid him a visit, we cannot escape the acquaintance now. So basically, what happened is Dad went and introduced himself to him behind Mom's back, even though he said he wasn't going to, and he was teasing her. So, anyway, the astonishment of the ladies was just what he wished, that of Miss Bennet, perhaps surpassing the rest. Though, when the first tumult of joy was over, she began to declare that it was what she had expected all along that while. How good it was of you, my dear Mr. Bennet. But I knew I should persuade you at last. I was sure you loved your girls too well to neglect such an acquaintance. Well, how pleased I am, and it is such a good joke, too, that you should be gone this morning, and never said a word about it till now. Now, Kitty, you may cough as much as you choose, said Mr. Bennet, and as he spoke he left the room, fatigued with the raptures of his wife. What an excellent father you have, girls, she said when the door was shut. I do not know how you will ever make him amends for his kindness, or me either, for that matter. At our time of life it is not so pleasant, I can tell you, to be making new acquaintances every day. But for your sake we will do anything. Lydia, my love, though you are the youngest, I dare say Mr. Bigley will dance with you at the next ball. Oh, said Lydia, shouting, I'm not afraid, for though I am the youngest, I am the tallest. The rest of the evening was spent in conjecture how soon he would return Mr. Bennet's visit, and determining when they should ask him to dinner. Chapter 3. Pride and Prejudice. Not all that Miss Bennet, however, with the assistance of her 5 daughters, could ask on the subject was sufficient to draw from her husband any satisfactory description of Mr. Bigley. They attacked him in various ways, with barefaced questions, ingenious various ways, with ingenious suppositions and distant surmises, but he eluded the skill of them all, and they were at last obliged to accept the second-hand intelligence of their neighbor, Lady Lucas. Her report was highly favorable. Sir William had been delighted with him. He was quite young, wonderfully handsome, extremely agreeable, and to crown the whole, he meant to be at the next assembly with a large party. Nothing could be more delightful. To be fond of dancing with a certain step towards falling in love, and very lively hopes of Mr. Bigley's heart were entertained. If I can but see one of my daughters happily settle at Netherfield, said Mrs. Bennet to her husband, and all the others equally well married, I shall have nothing to wish for. In a few days Mr. Bigley returned Mr. Bennet's visit, and sat about 10 minutes with him in his library. He had entertained hopes of being admitted to a sight of the young ladies, of whose beauty he had heard much, but he saw only the father. The ladies were somewhat more fortunate, for they had the advantage of asserting from an upper window that he wore a black coat and rode a black horse. So the girls watched him from the window but never went down to meet him. An invitation to dinner was soon afterwards dispatched, and already had Mrs. Bennet planned the courses that were to do credit to her housekeeping. When an answer arrived, which deferred all, Mr. Bigley was obliged to be in town the following day, and coincidentally unable to accept the honor of their invitation, etc. Miss Bennet was quite disconcerted. She could not imagine what business he could have in town so soon after he arrived in Hertfordshire, and she began to fear that he might be always flying about from one place to another, and never settle at Netherfield as he ought to be. Lady Lucas quieted her fears a little by starting the idea of him being gone to London only to get a large party for the ball, and a report soon followed that Mr. Bigley was to bring 12 ladies and 7 gentlemen with him to the assembly. The girls grieved over such a number of ladies, but were comforted the day before the ball by hearing that instead of 12 he had brought only 6 with him for London, his 5 sisters and a cousin from London. And when the party entered the assembly room, it consisted of only 5 altogether. Mr. Bigley had 2 sisters, the husband of the eldest, and another young man. Mr. Bigley was good looking and a gentleman like. He had a pleasant countenance and easy, unaffected manners. His sisters were fine women with an air of decided fashion. His brother-in-law, Mr. Hertz, merely looked the gentleman, but his friend, Mr. Darcy, soon drew the attention of the room by his fine, tall person, handsome features, noble mien, and the report which was in general circulation within 5 minutes after his entrance of his having 10,000 a year. The gentlemen pronounced him to be a fine figure of a man. The ladies declared he was much handsomer than Mr. Bigley, and he was looked at with good admiration from about half the evening till quite wrong page. Sorry. Till his manner gave a disgust which turned the tide of his popularity, for he was discovered to be proud to be above his company, and above being pleased, and not all his large estate in Dursbury could then save him from having a most forbidding, disagreeable countenance, and being unworthy to be compared with his friend. Mr. Bigley had soon made himself acquainted with all the principal people in the room. He was lively and unreserved, danced every dance, was angry that the ball closed so early, and talked of giving one himself at the Netherfield. Such amiable qualities must speak for themselves. What a contrast between him and his friend! Mr. Darcy danced only one with Mrs. Hurst, and once with Mrs. Bigley, declined being introduced to any of the other lady, and spent the rest of the evening in a walking about the room, speaking occasionally to one of his own party. His character was decided. He was the proudest, most disagreeable man in the world, and everybody hoped that he would never come there again. Amongst the most violent against him was Mrs. Bennet, who, disliked of his general behavior, was sharpened into particular resentment by him having slighted one of her daughters. Elizabeth Bennet had been obliged, by the sarcasticity of gentlemen, to sit down for 2 dances, and during part of that time Mr. Darcy had been standing near enough for her to overhear a conversation between him and Mr. Bingley, who came from the dance for a few minutes to press his friend to join it. "Come, Darcy," he said, "I must have you dance. I hate to see you standing about by yourself in this stupid manner. You have much better dance." "I certainly shall not. You know how I detest it, unless I am particularly acquainted with my partner. At such an assembly as this, it would be insupportable. Your sisters are engaged, and there is not another woman in the room who it would not be a punishment for me to be standing up with." "I would not be so facetious as you are," cried Mr. Bingley, "for a kingdom. Upon my honour, I never met with so many pleasant girls in my life as I have this evening, and there are several of them, you see, uncommonly pretty." "You are dancing with the only handsome girl in the room," said Mr. Darcy, looking at the eldest Miss Bennet. "Oh, she is the most beautiful creature I ever beheld. But there is one of her sisters sitting down just behind you, who is very pretty, and I dare say very agreeable. Do let me ask my partner to introduce you." "What do you mean?" And turning around, he looked for a moment at Elizabeth, still catching her eye. He withdrew his own and coldly said, "She is tolerable, but not handsome enough to temper me, and I am in no humor at present to give consequence to young ladies who are slightly by other men. You had better return to your partner and enjoy her smiles, for you are wasting your time with me." Mr. Bingley followed his advice. Mr. Darcy walked off, and Elizabeth remained with no very cordial feeling toward him. She told the story, however, with great spirit amongst her friends, for she had a very lively, playful disposition, which delighted in anything ridiculous. The evening, although passed off pleasantly to the whole family, Mrs. Bennet had seen her eldest daughter much admired by the Netherfield party. Mr. Bingley had danced with her twice, and she had been disgusted by her sisters. Or, excuse me, she had been distinguished by her sisters. Jane was much more gratified by this as her Jane was as much gratified by this as her mother could be, though in a quieter way. Elizabeth felt Jane's pressure. Mary had heard herself mentioned to Miss Bingley as much accomplished girl in the neighborhood, and Catherine and Lydia had been fortunate enough to be never without partners, which was all that they had yet learned to care for at a ball. They returned therefore in good spirits to Longbourn, the village where they lived, and of which they were the principal inhabitants. They found Mr. Bennet still up, with a book, as he was regardless of time, and on the present occasion he had a good deal of curiosity as to the event of the evening which had raised such splendor expectations. He had rather hoped that all his wife's views on the stranger would be disappointed, but he soon found that he had a very different story to hear. "Oh, my dear Mr. Bennet," as she entered the room, "we have had the most delightful evening, a most excellent ball. I wish you had been there. Jane was so admired. Nothing could be like it. Everybody said how well she looked, and Mr. Bingley thought she was quite beautiful, and danced with her twice. Only think of that, my dear. He actually danced with her twice, and she was the only creature in the room that he asked a second time. First of all, he asked Miss Lucas. I was so vexed to see him stand up with her, but, however, he did not admire her at all. Indeed, nobody can, you know. And he seemed quite struck with Jane as she was going down the dance. So he inquired who she was, and got introduced, and asked her for the 2 next. Then the 2:30 danced with Mrs. King, and 2:04 with Maria Lucas, and the 2:05 with Jane again, and the 2:06 with Lizzie, and the Boulanger. If he had had any compassion for me," cried her husband impatiently, "he would not have danced half so much. For God's sake, say no more of his partners. Ugh! That he had sprained his ankle in the first place. Oh, my dear," continued Miss Bennet, "I am quite delighted with him. He is so excessively handsome, and his sisters are charming women. I never in my life saw anything more elegant than their dresses. I dare say the lace upon Miss Hurst's gown." Here she was interrupted again. Mr. Bennet protested against any description of finery. She was therefore obliged to seek another branch of the subject, and related, with much bitterness of spirit and some exaggeration, the shocking rudeness of Mr. Darcy. But I can assure you, she added, that Lizzie does not lose much by not suiting his fancy, for he is a most disagreeable, horrid man, not at all worth pleasing, so high and so conceited that there was no enduring him. He walked here, he walked there, fancying himself so very great, not handsome enough to dance with. I wish you had been there, my dear, to have given him one of your step downs. I quite detest that man. All right, guys. The next chapter, chapter 4. When Jane and Elizabeth were alone, the former, who had been cautious in her praise of Mr. Bingley before, expressed to her sister how very much she admired him. He is just what a young man ought to be, she said. Sensible, good-humored, lively, and I never saw such happy manners, so much ease, with such perfect good breeding. He is also handsome, replied Elizabeth, which a young man ought likewise to be, if he as possibly can. His character is thereby complete. I was very much flattered by him asking me to dance a second time. I did not expect such a compliment. Did you not? I did for you, but that is one great difference between you and me. Compliments always take you by surprise, and me never. What could be more natural than him asking you again? He could not help seeing that you were about 5 times as pretty as every other woman in the room. No thanks to his gallantry for that. Well, he certainly is very agreeable, and I give you leave to like him. You have liked many a stupider person. Dear Lizzie, oh, you are a great deal too apt, you know, to like people in general. You never see fault in anyone. All the world is good and agreeable in your eyes. I never heard you speak ill of a human being in my life. I would wish not to be hasty in censoring anyone, but I always speak what I think. I know you do, and it is that which makes the wonder, with your great sense, to be so honestly blind to the follies and nonsense of others. Affectionate of candor is common enough. One meets it everywhere. But to be candid without ostentation or design, to take the good of everyone's character and make it still better and say nothing of the bad, belongs to you alone. And so, you like this man's sister too, do you? Their manners are not equal to his. Certainly not at first, but they are very pleasing women when you converse with them. Ms. Bingley is to live with her brother and keep his house, and I am much mistaken if we shall not find a very charmed neighbor in her. Elizabeth listened in silence, but was not convinced. Their behavior at the assembly had not been calculated to please in general, and with more quickness of observation and less pliancy of temperance than her sister, and with a judgment too unassailed by any attention to herself, she was very little disposed to approve them. They were in fact very fine ladies, not deficient in good humor, but they were pleased, nor in the power of being agreeable than they chose it, but proud and conceited. They were rather handsome, had been educated in one of the first private seminaries in town, had a fortune of £20,000, were in the habit of spending more than they ought, and of associating with people of rank, and were therefore, in every respect, entitled to think well of themselves and meaningly of others. They were of a respectable family in the north of England, a circumstance more deeply impressed on their memories than that their brother's fortune and their own had been acquired by trade. Mr. Bingley inherited property to the amount of nearly £100,000 from his father, who had intended to purchase an estate but did not live to do it. Mr. Bingley intended it likewise, and sometimes made choice of his county, but as he was so now provided with a good house and the liberty of a manor, it was doubtful to many of those who best knew the easiness of his temper whether he might not spend the remainder of his days at Netherfield, and leave the next generation to purchase. His sisters were very anxious for his having an estate of his own, but though he was now established only as a tenant, Ms. Bigley was by no means unwilling to preside at his table, nor with Miss Hurt, who had married a man of more fashion than fortune, less disposed to consider his house as her home when it suited her. Mr. Bigley had not been of age 2 years when he was tempered by an accidental recommendation to look at Netherfield House. He did look at it and into it for half an hour, was pleased with the situation and the principal rooms, satisfied with what the owner said in praise, and took it immediately. Between him and Darcy there was a very steady friendship, in spite of a great opposition of character. Bigley was endeavored to Darcy by the easiness, openness, ductility of his temper, though not disposition could but though no disposition could offer a greater contrast to his own, and though with his own he never appeared dissatisfied. On the strength of Darcy's regard, Bigley had the firmest reliance, and of his judgment the highest opinion. In understanding, Darcy was the superior. Bigley was by no means deficient, but Darcy was clever. He was at the same time haughty, reserved, facetious, and his manners, though well bred, were not inviting. He was a dick. Anyway, in that respect, his friend had greatly the advantage. Bigley was sure of being liked wherever he appeared. Darcy was continually grieving offense. The manner in which they spoke of the Meryton assembly was sufficiently characteristic. Bigley had never met with pleasanter people or prettier girls in his life. Everybody had been most kind and attentive to him. There had been no formality, no stiffness. He had soon felt acquainted with all the room, and as to Miss Bennet, he could not conceive an angel more beautiful. Darcy, on the contrary, had seen a collection of people in whom there were little beauty and no fashion, for none of whom he had felt the smallest interest, and from none received either attention or pleasure. Miss Bennet he acknowledged to be pretty, but she smiled too much. Mrs. Hurst and her sister allowed it to be so, but still they admired her and liked her, and pronounced her to be a sweet girl, and one whom they should not object to know more of. Miss Bennet was therefore established as a sweet girl, and their brother felt authorized by such. I'm sorry, I get stuck sometimes. By such. I cannot read the word. Condemnation. To think of her as his chosen. Without condemnation. To think of her as his chosen. Fleet. Chapter 5. Within a short walk of Longbourn lived a family with whom the Bennets were particularly intimate. Oof, I can't believe that I am reading still, but I'm going to keep going because it's pretty good. Here we go. Turn you guys in. Turn you in. You be looking at me this way. Hey, hot retarded chicks. I'm sorry. I'm just in here practicing my reading. Maybe it'll put you to sleep. It can be a bedtime story. I will call this Micah Matina's Bedtime Stories. Tonight we're reading a part of Pride and Prejudice. Anyway, let's get back to chapter 5. Within a short walk of Longbourn lived a family with whom the Bennets were particularly intimate. Sir William Lucas had been formerly in trade in Meryton, where he had made a tolerable fortune and risen to the honor of knighthood by an address to the king during his mayoralty. The distinction had perhaps been felt too strongly. It had given him a disgust to his business and to his residence in a small market town. And quitting them both, he had removed with him his family to a house about a mile from Meryton. Denomination from that period Lucas Lodge, where he could think with pleasure of his own importance, and undershackled by business, occupy himself solely in being civil to all the world. For though elated by his rank, it did not render him supercilious. On the contrary, he was all attention to everyone, by nature inoffensive, friendly, and obliging. His presentation at St. James has made him courteous. Lady Lucas was a very good, kind woman, not too clever to be a valuable neighbor to be blah, blah, blah. Not too clever to be a valuable neighbor to Mrs. Bennet. They had several children. The eldest of them do, 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 The eldest of them, sensible, intelligent, young woman about 27, was Elizabeth's intimate friend. That Miss Lucas and that Miss Bennet should meet to talk over a ball was absolutely necessary. That morning, after the assembly, brought the former to Longbourn to hear and to communicate. You began the evening well, Charlotte, said Mrs. Bennet with civil self-command to Mrs. Lucas. You were Mr. Bigley's first choice. Yes, but he seemed to like his second better. Oh, you mean Jane, I suppose, because he danced with her twice? To be sure that he did seem as if he admired her. Indeed, I'd rather believe that he did. I heard something about it, but I hardly know what. Something about Mr. Robinson? Perhaps you mean what I overheard between him and Mr. Robinson. Did not I mention it to you? Mr. Robinson's asking him how he liked our Meryton assembly, and whether he did not think there were a great many pretty women in the room, and which he thought the prettiest, and he answered immediately in the last question, Oh, the eldest Miss Bennet, beyond a doubt. There cannot be two opinions on that point. Upon my word, well, that was very decided indeed. That does seem as if, but however, it may all come to nothing, you know. My overhearings were more to the purpose than yours, Eliz, said Charlotte. Mr. Darcy is not so well worth listening to as his friend is. He, poor Eliz, to be only just tolerable. I beg you would not put it into Lizzie's head to be vexed by his ill treatment, for he is such a disagreeable man that it would be quite a misfortune to be liked by him. Miss Long told me last night that he had sat close to her for half an hour without once opening his lips. Are you quite sure, ma'am? Is not there a little mistake? Said Jane. I certainly saw Mr. Darcy speaking to her. Eh, because she asked him at last how he liked Netherfield, and he could not help answering her. But she said he seemed very angry at being spoken to. Mr. Bigley told me, said Jane, that he could never speak much, unless among his intimate acquaintances. With them he is remarkably agreeable. I do not believe a word of it, my dear. If he had been so very agreeable, he would have talked to Miss Long. But I can guess how it was. Everybody says that he ate up with pride, and I dare say he'd heard somehow that Mrs. Long does not keep a carriage, and he had to come to the ball in a hack chaise. I do not mind him not talking to Mrs. Long, said Miss Lucas, but I wish he had danced with Eliz. Another time, Lizzie, said her mother. I would not dance with him if I were you. I believe, ma'am, I may safely promise you never to dance with him. His pride, said Miss Lucas, does not offend me so much as pride often does, because there is an excuse for it. One cannot wonder that so very fine a young man, with family, fortune, everything in his favor, should think highly of himself. If I may so express it, he has a right to be proud. That is very true, replied Elizabeth, and I could eagerly forgive his pride if he had not mortified mine. Pride, observed Mary, who piqued herself upon the solidarity of her reflections, is a very common failure, I believe. By all that I have ever read, I am convinced that it is very common indeed, that human nature is particularly prone to it, and there are very few of us who do not cherish a feeling of self-complacency on the score of some quality or other, real or imaginary. Vanity and pride are different things, though the words are often used simultaneously, synonymously. A person may be proud without being vain. pride relates more to our opinion of ourselves, vanity to what we would have others think of us. If I were as rich as Mr. Darcy, cried a young Lucas who came in with his sisters, I should not care how proud I was. I would keep a pack of foxhounds and drink a bottle of wine every day. Then you would drink a great deal more than you ought, said Miss Bennet, and if I were to see you at it, I should take away your bottle directly. The boy protested that she should not. She continued to declare that she would, and the argument ended only with the visit. Chapter 6. The ladies of Longbourn soon waited on those of Netherfield. The visit was returned in due form. Miss Bennet's pleasing manner grew on the goodwill of Miss Hurst and Miss Bingley, and though the mother was fond to be intolerable, and the younger sisters not worth speaking to, a wish of being better acquainted with them was expressed towards the two eldest. By Jane, this attention was received with great pleasure, but Elizabeth still saw superciliousness in their treatment of everybody, hardly excepting even his sister, and could not like them. Though their kindness to Jane, such as it was, had a value as arising in all probability from the influence of their brother's admiration, it was generally evident whenever they met that he did admire her, and to her it was equally evident that Jane was yielding to the preference which she had begun to entertain from him for the first, and was in a way to be very much in love. But she considered with pleasure that it was not likely to be discovered by the world in general, since Jane united with great strength of feeling, a composure of temper, and a uniform cheerfulness of manner, which would guard her from the suspicions of the impertinent. She mentioned this to her friend Miss Lucas. It may perhaps be pleasant, replied Charlotte, to be able to impose on the public in such a case, but it is sometimes a disadvantage to be so very guarded. If a woman concealed her affection with the same skill from the object of it, she may lose the opportunity of fixing him, and it will then be but poor consolation to believe the world equally in the dark. There was so much of gratitude or vanity in almost every attachment, that it is not safe to leave any in itself. We could all begin freely. A slight preference is natural enough, but there are very few of us who have heart enough to be really in love without encouragement. In 9 cases out of 10, a woman had better show more affection than she feels. Bingley likes your sisters undoubtedly, but he may never do more than like her if she does not help him on. But she does help him on, as much as her nature will allow. If I can perceive her regard for him, he must be the simpleton indeed not to discover it too. Remember, Eliza, that's what it is. It's not Eliz. I said Eliz. It's Eliza. Remember, Eliza, that he does not know Jane's disposition as you and I. But if a woman is partial to a man and does not endeavor to conceal it, he must find it not. Perhaps he must if he sees enough of her. But then, though Bingley and Jane meet tolerably often, it is never for many hours together, and as they always see each other in large mixed parties, it is impossible that every moment should be employed in conversing together. Jane should therefore make the most of every half hour in which she can command his attention. When else she is secure of him, there will be leisure for falling in love as much as she chooses. Your plan is a good one, replied Elizabeth, where nothing is in question but the desire of being well-mannered, and if I were determined to get a rich husband, or any husband, I dare say I should adopt it. But these are not Jane's feelings. She is not acting by design. As yet, she cannot even be certain of the degree of her own regard, nor of its reasonableness. She has known him only a fortnight. She danced 4 dances with him at Meryton. She saw him one morning at his own house, and has since dined in company with him 4 times. This is not quite enough to make her understand his character. Not as you represent it. Had she merely dined with him, she might only have discovered whether he had a good appetite. But you must remember that fourth evening had been also spent together, and 4 evenings may do a great deal. Yes, these 4 evenings have enabled them to assert that they both like vinegar better than commerce. But with respect to any other leading characteristic, I do not imagine that much has been unfolded. Well, said Charlotte, I wish Jane success with all my heart, and if she were married to him tomorrow, I should think she had a chance of happiness, as if she were to be studied his character for a 12 month. Happiness in marriage is entirely a matter of chance. If the disposition of the parties are ever so well known to each other, or ever so similar beforehand, it does not advance their felicity in the least. They always continue to grow sufficiently unlike afterwards to have their share of vexation. And it is better to know as little as possible of the defects of the person with whom you are to pass your life. You make me laugh, Charlotte, but it is not sound. You know it is not sound, and that you would never act in this way yourself. Occupied in observing Mr. Bigley's attention to her sister, Elizabeth was far from suspecting that she was herself becoming an object of some interest in the eyes of his friend. Mr. Darcy had at first scarcely allowed her to be pretty. He had looked at her without admiration at the ball, and when they next met, he looked at her only to criticize. But no sooner had he made it clear to himself and his friends that she had hardly a good feature in her face, than he began to find it was rendered uncommonly intelligent by the beautiful expression of her dark eyes. To this discovery succeeded some others equally mortifying. Though he had detected with a critical eye more one failure of perfect symmetry in her form, he was forced to acknowledge her figure and to be light and pleasing, and in spite of his asserting that her manners were not those of the fashionable world, he was caught by their easy playfulness. Of this she was perfectly unaware. To her, he was only the man who made himself agreeable nowhere, and who had not thought her handsome enough to dance with. He began to wish to know more of her, and as a step towards conversing with her himself, attended to her conversation with others. His doing so drew notice to her. It was at Sir William Lucas's, where a large party was assembled. What does Mr. Darcy mean, said she to Charlotte, by listening to my conversation with Colonel Forster? That is a question which Mr. Darcy can only answer. But if he does it any more, I shall certainly let him know that I see what he is all about. He has a very satirical eye, and if I do not begin by being impertinent myself, I shall soon grow afraid of him. On his approaching them soon afterwards, though without seeming to have any intention of speaking, Miss Lucas defied her friend to mention such a subject to him. With immediately provoking Elizabeth to do it, she turned to him and said, did not you think, Mr. Darcy, that I expressed myself uncommonly well just now when I was teasing Colonel Forster to give us a ball at Meryton? With great energy, but it is a subject which always makes a lady energetic. You are severe on us. It will be her turn soon to be teased, said Miss Lucas. I am going to open the instrument, Eliza, and you know what that follows. You are a very strange creature by way of a friend, always wanting me to play and sing before anybody and everybody. If my vanity had taken a musical turn, you would have been invaluable. But as it is, I would really rather not sit down before those who must be in that habit of hearing the very best performers. Oh, Miss Lucas, persevering, however, she added, very well, if it must be so, it must, and saying, which everybody here is, of course, familiar with, keep your breath to cool your porridge, and I shall keep mine to swell my song. Her performance was pleasing, though by no means capital. After a song or two, and before she could reply to the entries of several that she would sing again, she was eagerly succeeded at the instrument by her sister Mary, who, having, in consequence of being the only plain one in the family, worked hard for knowledge and accomplishments, was always impotent for display. Mary had neither genius nor taste, and though vanity had given her application, it had given her likeness, a pendic air and conceit manner which would have injured a higher degree of excellence than she had reached. Elizabeth, easy and unaffected, had been listening to with much more pleasure, though not playing half so well, and Mary, at the end of a long concerto, was glad to purchase praise and gratitude by Scotch and Irish airs at the request of her younger sisters, who, with some of the Lucases and 2 or 3 officers, joined eagerly in dancing at one end of the room. Mr. Darcy stood near them in silent indignation at such a mode of passing the evening, to the exclusion of all conversation, and was too much engrossed by his own thoughts to perceive that Sir William Lucas was his neighbor, till Sir William thus began. What a charming amusement for young people this is, Mr. Darcy. There is nothing like dancing after all. I consider it as one of the first refinements of polished societies. Certainly, sir, and it has the advantage also of being in vogue amongst the less polished societies of the world. Every savage can dance. Sir William only smiled. Your friend performs delightfully, he continued after a pause on seeing Bingley join the group, and I doubt not that you are an adept in the science yourself, Mr. Darcy. You saw me dance at Meryton, I believe, sir. Yes, indeed, and received no inconsiderable pleasure from the sight. Do you often dance at Sir James? Never, sir. Do you not think it would be a proper compliment to the place? It is a compliment which I never pay to any place if I can avoid it. You have a house in town, I conclude? Mr. Darcy bowed. I had once some thoughts of fixing in town myself, for I am fond of superior society, but I did not feel quite certain that the air of London would agree with Lady Lucas. He paused in hopes of an answer, but his companion was no disposed to make any, and Elizabeth at that instant moving towards them, he was struck with the notice of doing a very gallant thing and calling out to her, "My dear Miss Eliza, why are you not dancing?" "Mr. Darcy, you must allow me to present you this young lady to you, a very desirable partner. You cannot refuse to dance, I am sure, when so much beauty is before you." And taking her hand, he would have given it to Mr. Darcy, who, though extremely surprised, was not unwilling to receive it, when she instantly drew back and said with some discomposure to Sir William, "Indeed, sir, I have not the least intention of dancing. I entreat you not to suppose that I moved this way in order to beg for a partner." Mr. Darcy, with grave propriety, requested to be allowed the honor of her hand, but in vain. Elizabeth was determined, nor did Sir William at all shake her purpose by his attempt at persuasion. "You exclude so much in the dance, Miss Eliza? That is cruel to deny me the happiness of seeing you, and though this gentleman dislikes the amusement in general, he can have no objection, I am sure, to oblige us for 1/2 hour." "Mr. Darcy is also politeness," said Elizabeth, smiling. "He is indeed, but considering the inducement, my dear Miss Eliza, he cannot wonder at his compliance, for who would object to such a partner?" Elizabeth looked archly and turned away. Her resistance had not injured her with the gentleman, and he was thinking of her with some complacency, when thus accosted by Mr. Bingley. "I can guess the subject of your reverie?" I should imagine not. You are considering how insupportable it would be to pass many evenings in this manner, in such society, and indeed I am quite of your opinion. I was never more annoyed. The insipidity and yet noise, the nothingness and yet the self importance of all these people. What would I give to hear your stricture on them? Your conjecture is totally wrong, I assure you. My mind was more agreeably engaged. I had been meditating on the very great pleasure which a pair of fine eyes in the face of a pretty woman can bestow. Miss Bigley immediately fixed her eyes on his face and desired he would tell her what lady had credited of inspiring such reflection. Mr. Darcy replied with great intrepidity, Miss Elizabeth Bennet. Miss Elizabeth Bennet, repeated Miss Bigley. I am all astonished. How long has she been such a favorite? A prayer when I am to wish you joy? That is exactly the question which I expected you to ask. A lady's imagination is very rapid. It jumps from admiration to love, from love to matrimony in a moment. You would be wishing me joy. I knew you would be wishing me joy. Nay, if you are so serious about it, I shall consider the matter and absolutely settled. You will have a charming mother-in-law indeed, and of course she will be always at Pemberley with you. He listened to her with perfect indifference while she chose to entertain herself in this manner, and as his composure convinced her that all was safe, her wit flowed long. Miss Bennet's property consisted almost entirely in an estate of 2,000 a year, which, unfortunately for his daughters, was entailed in default of heirs male on a distant relation, and their mother's fortune, through ample of her situation in life, could not but ill supply the deficiency of his. Her father had been an attorney in Meryton and had left her £4,000. She had a sister married to Mr. Phillips, who had been a clerk to their father and succeeded him in the business, and a brother settled in London in a respectable line of trade. The village of Longbourn was only 1 mile from Meryton, a most convenient distance for the young ladies who were usually tempered thither 3 or 4 times a week to pay their duty to their aunt, to the miller's shop just over the way. The 2 youngest of the family, Catherine and Lydia, were particularly frequent in these attentions. Their minds were more vacant than their sisters', and when nothing better offered, a walk to Meryton was necessary to amuse their morning hours and furnish conversation for the evening. And however bare of news the country in general might be, they always contrived to learn some from their aunt. At present, indeed, they were all well supplied, both with news and happiness, by the recent arrival of a militia regime in the neighborhood. It was to remain the whole winter, and Meryton was the headquarters. Their visits to Ms. Phillips was now productive of the most interesting intelligence. Every day added something to their knowledge of the officers' names and connections. Their lodgings were not long a secret, and at length they began to know the officers themselves. Mr. Phillips visited them all, and this opened to his nieces a source of felicity unknown before. They could talk of nothing but officers and Mr. Bigley's large fortune, the mention of which gave animation to their mother, was worthless in their eyes when opposed to the regimentals of an ensign. After listening one morning to their effusions on this subject, Mr. Bennet coolly observed, for all that I can collect by your manner of talking, you must be 2 of the silliest girls in the country. I have suspected it some time, but I am now convinced. Catherine was disconcerted and made no answer, but Lydia, with perfect indifference, continued to express her admiration of Captain Carter and her hope of seeing him in the course of the day, as he was going the next morning to London. I am astonished, my dear, said Miss Bennet, that you should be so ready to think your own children silly. If I wished to think slightly of anybody's children, it should not be of my own, however. If my children are silly, I must hope to be always sensible of it. Yes, but as it happens, they are all of them very clever. This is the only point, I flatter myself, on which we do not agree. I had hoped their own sentiments coincide in every particular, but I must so far differ from you as to think our two youngest daughters uncommonly foolish. My dear Mr. Bennet, you must not expect such girls to have the sense of their father and mother. When they get to our age, I dare say they will not think about officers any more than we do. I remember the time when I liked a red coat myself very well, and indeed, with 5 or 6 thousand a year, should want one of my girls. I shall not. Blah, blah, blah. I'm sorry, guys. Hey, somebody's listening. Hot retarded chicks. Thank you for listening. Anyway, I shall not say nay to him, and I thought Colonel Foster looked very becoming the other night at Sir William's in his regimentals. Mamma, cried Lydia, my aunt says that Colonel Foster and Captain Carter do not go so often to Miss Watson's as they did when they first came. She sees them now very often standing in Clark's library. Mrs. Bennet was prevented replying by the entrance of the footman with a note for Miss Bennet. It came from Netherfield. The servant waited for an answer. Miss Bennet's eyes sparkled with pleasure, and she was eagerly calling out while her daughter read. Well, Jane, who is it from? What is it about? What does he say? Well, Jane, make haste and tell us. Make haste, my love. It is from Miss Bingley, said Jane, and then read it out loud. My dear friend, you are not so compassionate as to dine today with Louise and me. We shall be in danger of hating each other for the rest of our lives, for a whole day's tete-a-tete between two women can never end without a quarrel. Come as soon as you can on the receipt of this. My brother and the gentlemen are to dine with the officers. Yours ever, Caroline Bingley. With the officers, cried Lydia. I wonder my aunt did not tell us of that. Dining out, said Miss Bennet. This is very unlucky. Can I have the carriage? Said Jane. No, my dear, you had better go on horseback, because it seems likely to rain, and then you must stay all night. That would be a good scheme, said Elizabeth, if you were sure that they would not offer to send her home. Oh, but the gentleman would have Mr. Bingley's chaise to go to Meryton, and the Hursts have no horses to theirs. I had much rather go in the coach. But, my dear, your father cannot spare the horses, I am sure. They are wanted on the farm. Mr. Bennet, are they not? They are wanted on the farm much oftener than I can get them. But if you have got them today, said Elizabeth, my mother's purpose will be answered. She did at last extort from her father an acknowledgment that the horses were engaged. Jane was therefore obliged to go on horseback, and her mother attended her to the door with many cheerful prognostics of a bad day. Her hopes were answered. Jane had not been gone long before it rained hard. Her sisters were uneasy for her, but her mother was delighted. The rain continued the whole evening without intermission. Jane certainly could not come back. This was a lucky idea of mine, indeed, said Miss Bennet more than once, as if the credit of making it rain were all her own. Till the next morning, however, she was not aware of all the felicity of her contrive. Breakfast was scarcely over when a servant from the Netherfield brought the following note from Elizabeth. My dearest Lizzie, I find myself very unwell this morning, which, I suppose, is to be imputed to my getting wet through yesterday. My kind friends will not hear of me returning home till I am better. They insist also on my seeing Mr. Jones. Therefore, do not be alarmed if you should not hear of him having been to me, and expecting a sore throat and headache. There is not much in the matter with me. Yours, etc. Well, my dear, said Mr. Bennet, when Elizabeth had read the note out loud, if your daughter should have a dangerous fit of illness, if she should die, it would be a comfort to know that it was all in pursuit of Mr. Bingley and under your orders. Oh, I am not at all afraid of her dying. People do not die of little trifling colds. She'll be taken good care of. As long as she stays there, it is all very well. I would go and see her if I could have the carriage. Elizabeth, feeling really anxious, was determined to go to her, though the carriage was not to be had, and as she, with one horse, was no horsewoman, walking was her only alternative. She declared her resolution. How can you be so silly, cried her mother, as to think of such a thing? And all this dirt? You will not be fit to be seen when you get there. I shall be very fit to see Jane, which is all I want. Is this a hint to me, Lizzie? Said her father, to send for horses? No, indeed, I do not wish to avoid the walk. The distance is nothing. When one has a motive, only 3 miles. I should be back by dinner. I admire the activity of your benevolence, observed Mary, but every impulse of feeling should be guided by reason. In my opinion, exertion should always be in proportion to what is required. We will go as far as Meryton with you, said Catherine and Lydia. Elizabeth accepted their company, and the 3 young ladies set off together. If we make haste, said Lydia. They walked along. Perhaps we may see something of Captain Carter before he goes. In Meryton they parted. The 2 youngsters repaired to the lodges of one of the officers' wives, and Elizabeth continued her walk alone, crossing field after field at a quick pace, jumping over stiles and springing over puddles with impatient activity, and finding herself at last within view of the horse, with weary ankles, dirty stockings, and a face glowing with the warmth of exercise. She was shown into the breakfast parlor, where all but Jane were assembled, and where her appearance created a great deal of surprise. That she should have walked 3 miles so early in the day in such dirty weather, and by herself, was almost incredible to Miss Hurst and Miss Bigley, and Elizabeth was convinced that they held her in contempt for it. She was received, however, very politely by them, and in their brother's manners there was something better than. Look at, there's a picture of Charlotte walking to the town to go see her sister who got the sniffles while she was visiting a boy and had to spend the night. And you know, back in those days when you were 14, they were marrying us off. Give me a second, you guys. I thought I was going to DoorDash, but apparently I don't have any more time on the clock right now. I need to make $56 more by Sunday for my car insurance. Today is Thursday. I can do it. I can make $56 more, and then I'll be able to buy some food and eat. Anyway, blah blah blah. I'm gonna put my TikTok on real quick. Okay, very quickly. Do my ticky. All right. No, done. What's wrong? Why can't I go live? Did I do something bad? No, dare I go. Perfection is perfection. All right, guys. 1, 2, 3. From if I get in trouble for this too. The end. The end. 3, 2, 1. I'm sorry. I'm gonna keep reading, but I'm live on my TikTok. Hi, Ticker Talk, because a hot retarded chick on TikTok. It's not so much. It doesn't really count how many people watch, but you know, also time on TikTok. Time. So yeah, I will get back to chapter 6. I might have skipped a little bit. When the clock struck 3, Elizabeth felt that she must go, and very unwillingly said so. Mr. Bingley offered her the carriage, and she only wanted a little Oh, okay, I remember where I am now. I apologize. They were polite to her sister, even though she looked filthy. So I'm reading for Pride and Prejudice, and I just turned this on, so I am on the ending of the 5th chapter. I'm reading about Elizabeth meeting Mr. Bingley. So anyway, her sister just got there, and Mr. Darcy said very little, and Mr. Hurst nothing at all. The former was divided between admiration of the brilliancy which exercise had given to her complexion, and doubt as to the occasions justifying her coming so far alone. The latter was thinking only of his breakfast. Her inquiries after her sister were not very favoringly answered. Miss Bennet had slept ill, and though up, was very feverish, and not very well enough to leave her room. Elizabeth was glad to be taken to her immediately, and Jane, who had only been withheld by the fear of giving alarm or inconvenience from expressing in her note how much she longed for such a visit, was delighted at her entrance. She was not equal, however, to much conversation, and when Miss Bingley left them together, could attempt little besides expression of gratitude for the extraordinary kindness she was treated with. Elizabeth silently attended her. When breakfast was over, they were joined by the sisters, and Elizabeth began to like them herself. When she saw how much affection and solicitude they showed for Jane, the apothecary came, and having examined his patient, said as much be supposed that she had caught a violent cold, and that they must endeavor to get the better of it, advised her to return to bed, and promised her some draughts. The advice was followed readily, for the feverish symptoms increased, and her head ached acutely. Elizabeth did not quiet her room for a moment, nor were the other ladies often absent. The gentlemen being out, they had in fact nothing to do elsewise. And I'm sorry, you guys, I am just reading my very, very old copy of Pride and Prejudice. Anyway, when the clock struck 3, Elizabeth felt that she must go, and very unwillingly said so. Miss Bingley offered her the carriage, and she only wanted a little pressing to accept it. When Jane testified such concern in parting with her, that Miss Bingley was obliged to convert the offer of the chaise into an invitation to remain at the Netherfield for the present, Elizabeth most thankfully consented, and a servant was dispatched to Longbourn to acquaint the family with her stay and bringing back a supply of clothes. So now both sisters are at the boyfriend's house spending the night. Yeah, people did strange stuff back then, and everybody's in on it. Everybody's down with it. It's like Richie Riches. They're all spending the night together because it's raining and they don't want to go in the rain. No, and it actually sounds like they might all have the flu. At 5 o'clock, the two ladies retired to dress, and at 6:30, Elizabeth was summoned to dinner. To the civil inquiries which then poured in, and amongst which she had the pleasure of distinguishing the much superior solitude of Mr. Bingley's, she could not make a very favorable answer. Jane was by no means better. The sisters, on hearing this, repeated 3 or 4 times how much they were grieved, how shocked it was to have a bad cold, and how excessively they disliked being ill themselves. And then, though no more of the matter, and their indifference towards Jane, when not immediately before them, restored Elizabeth to the enjoyment of all her original dislike. Now she didn't like the sisters again because they were trying to force her to come eat dinner even though she didn't feel good. The only reason she was even spending the night there is to lay down and rest. The doctor said rest. She's supposed to rest, not put on nice clothes and go downstairs to eat formal dinner with a bunch of richy snots where you got to use this spoon for that and that fork for that. Yuck. No, I agree. right. Their brothers, indeed, was the only one of the party whom she could regard with any complacency. His anxiety for Jane was evident, and his attention to herself most pleasing, and they prevented her feeling herself so much an intruder as she believed she was considered by the others. She had very little notice from any but him. Miss Bingley was engrossed by Mr. Darcy, her sister scarcely less so, and as for Mr. Hurst, by whom Elizabeth sat, he was an indolent man, who lived only to eat, drink, and play at cards, who, when he found her preferred a plain dish to a rag out, had nothing to say to her. When dinner was over, she returned directly to Jane, and Miss Bingley began abusing her as soon as she was out of the room. Her manners were pronounced to be very bad indeed, a mixture of pride and impertinence. She had no conversation, no style, no taste, no beauty. Miss Hurst thought the same, and added, she had nothing, in short, to recommend her but being an excellent walker. I shall never forget her appearance this morning. She really looked almost wild, like I do right now. All righty then. Yeah, I look a little bit wild, right? I'm looking a little wild. All right. So anyway, when dinner was over, she returned directly to Jane. Blah 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 blah. She did indeed, Louis. I could hardly keep my countenance. Very nonsensical to come at all. Why must she be scamping about the country? Because her sister had a cold. Her hair so untidy, so blousy. Yes, and her petticoat. I hope you saw her petticoat 6 inches deep in the mud. I am absolutely certain. And the gown which had been let down to hide it, not doing its office. Your picture may be very exact, Louise, said Bingley, but this was all lost upon me. I thought Miss Elizabeth Bennet looked remarkably well when she came into the room this morning. Her dirty petticoat quite escaped my notice. You observed it, Mr. Darcy, I am sure, said Miss Bingley, and I am inclined to think that you would not wish to see your sister make such an expedition. Certainly not. To walk 3 miles or 4 miles or 5 miles or whatever it is above her ankles in dirt and alone, quite alone. What could she mean by it? It seems to me to show an abnormal sort of conceit, independence, a most country town indifference to decorum. It shows an affection for her sister that is very pleasing, said Bingley. I am afraid, Mr. Darcy, observed Mr. Bingley in a half whisper, that this adventure had rather affected your admiration of her fine eyes. Not at all, he replied. They were brightened by the exercise. A short pause followed this speech, and Miss Hurt began again. I have an excessive regard for Jane Bennet. She is really a very sweet girl, and I wish with all my heart she were well settled. But with such a father and mother, and with so low connections, I am afraid there is no chance of it. I think I have heard you say that their uncle is an attorney in Meryton. Yes, and they have another who lives somewhere near Cheapside. That is capital, added her sister, and they both laughed heartily. If they had uncles enough to fill all Cheapside, cried Bingley, it would not make them one jot less agreeable. But it must very materially lessen their chance of marrying men of any consideration in this world, replied Darcy. To this speech Bingley made no answer, but his sister gave to their hearty assertion, and indulged their mirth with some time at the expense of their dear friend's vulgar relations. With a renewal of tenderness, however, they repaired to her room on leaving the dining parlour, and she sat with her till summoned to coffee. She was still very poorly, and Elizabeth was not quite at her at all, till late in the evening, when she had the comfort of seeing her asleep, and when it appeared to be rather right than pleasant that she should go downstairs herself. On entering the drawing room, she found that whole party at loo, and was immediately invited to join them. But suspecting them to be playing high, she declined it, and making her sister the excuse, said she would amuse herself for the short time she could stay below with a book. Miss Hurst looked at her with astonishment. Do you prefer reading to cards? Said he. This is rather singular. Miss Elizabeth Eliza Bennet, said Miss Bigley, despises cards. She is a great reader and has no pleasure in anything else. I deserve neither such praise nor censure, cried Elizabeth. I am not a great reader, and I have pleasure in many things. In nursing your sister, I am sure you have pleasure, said Bingley, and I hope it will soon be increased by seeing her quite well. Elizabeth thanked him from her heart, and then walked towards a table where a few books were lying. He immediately offered to fetch her others, all that his library afforded. And I wish my collection were larger for your benefit and my own credit. But I am an idle fellow, and though I have not many, I have more than I ever looked into. Elizabeth assured him that she could suit herself perfectly with those in the room. I am astonished, said Miss Bigley, that my father should have left such a small collection of books. What a delightful library you have at Pemberley, Mr. Darcy. It ought to be good, he replied. It's been their work for many generations, and then you have added so much to it yourself. You are always buying books. I cannot comprehend the neglect of a family library in such days as these. Neglect! I am sure you neglect nothing that can add to the bounties of that noble place. Charles, when you build your house, I wish it may be filled half as delightfully as Pemberley. I wish it may. But I would really advise you to make your purchase in that neighborhood and take Pemberley for a kind of model. Give me a second, guys. Oh, nice. I like it. It's moving. Tom,
Huh?
I like your Egypt.
Oh yeah, it's a GIF, I guess you call
A
it.
GIF. Yeah, a GIF. It's a GIF. A GIF. A GIF. All right, guys. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to stop. I didn't mean to stop. I didn't mean to stop. I was reading. Hi, Mauricio. Hi, Lala. Hi, Freddie. I'm just reading my book. Wow. Pretty cool. I got stuff from you guys. Thank you very much. Well, you can come in, but what are you going to do? If I invite you in, all you're going to talk because I'm reading. And then, blah, 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 blah. And then you have added so much to it yourself. You are always buying books. I cannot comprehend. Blah, blah, blah. I wish it may, but I would really advise you to make your purchase. Blah, blah, blah. Elizabeth was so much caught by what passed as to leave her very little attention for her book. And soon, laying it wholly aside, she drew near the card table and stationed herself between Mr. Bingley and his elder sister to observe the game. Is Miss Darcy much grown since the spring? Said Miss Bigley. Will she be as tall as I am? I think she will. She is now about Miss Elizabeth Bennet's height, or rather taller. How I long to see her again. I never met with anybody who delighted me so much. Such a countenance, such manners, and so extremely accomplished for her age. Her performance on the piano forte is exquisite. It is amazing to me, said Bingley, how young ladies can have patience to be very accomplished as they are all. Good morning, Hawkwind. How are you? Is it morning? Shh, I'm reading. Shh, I'm reading. All young ladies accomplished. My dear Charles, what do you mean? Yes, all of them, I think. They all paint tables, cover screens, net purses. I scarcely know anyone who cannot do all of this, and I am sure I never heard a young lady spoken of for the first time without being informed that she was very accomplished. Your list of the common extent of the accomplishments, said Darcy, has too much truth. The word is applied to many a woman who deserves it not otherwise than by netting a purse or covering a screen, but I am very far from agreeing with you in your estimation of ladies in general. I cannot boast of knowing more than half a dozen in the whole range of my acquaintance that are really accomplished, nor I am sure, said Miss Bigley. Then, observed Elizabeth, you must comprehend a great deal in your ideal of an accomplished woman. Yes, I do comprehend a great deal in it. Oh, certainly, cried his faithful assistant. No one can be really esteemed accomplished who does not greatly surpass what is usually met with. A woman must have a thorough knowledge of music, singing, drawing, dancing, and the modern languages to deserve the word. And besides all this, she must possess a certain something in her air and manner of walking, the tone of her voice, her dress and expressions, or the word will be but half deserved. All of this she must possess, added Darcy, and to all this she must yet add something more substantial, and the improvement of her mind by extensive reading. I am no longer surprised at your knowing only 6 accomplished women. I'd rather wonder now at your knowing any. Are you so severe upon your own sex that it doubt the possibility of all of this? I never saw such a woman. I never saw such a capacity and taste and application and elegance as you described united. Miss Hurst and Miss Bigley both cried out against the injustice of her implied doubt, and were both protesting that they knew many women who answered testing that they knew many women who answered this description. When Mr. Hawk called them to order with bitter complaints of their inattention to what was going forward. As all conversation was therefore thereby at an end, Elizabeth soon afterward left the room. Eliza Bennet, said Miss Bigley, when the door were closed on her, is one of those young ladies who seeks to recommend themselves to the other sex by undervaluing their own. And with many men, I dare say, it succeeds. But, in my opinion, it is a paltry device and a very mean art. Undoubtedly, replied Darcy, to whom this remark was chiefly addressed. There is meanness in all the arts which ladies sometimes condescend to employ for captivation. Whatever bears affinity to cunning is despicable. Mr. Bingley was not so entirely satisfied with this reply as to continue the subject. Elizabeth joined them again, only to say that her sister was worse, and that she could not leave her. Bingley urged Mr. Jones being sent for immediately, while his sister, convinced that no country advice could be of any service, recommended an express to the town for one of the most eminent physicians. This she would not hear of, but she was not so unwilling to comply with their brother's proposal, and it was unsettled that Mr. Jones should be sent for early in the morning, if Miss Bennet was not decidedly better. Bigley was quite uncomfortable. His sisters declared that they were miserable. They solaced their wretchedness, however, by duetted after supper, while he could find no better relief to his feelings than by giving his housekeeper directions that every possible attention might be paid to the sick lady and her sister. All right, I go get a drink. Hot retarded chicks, are you still here? What are you feeding them on my chicken? You know there's fresh chicken on there too.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, yeah, that, but I don't want to take that. I just look at the shredded a little bit. Yeah, you don't mind, right?
No, not at all. You're good.
Thank you.
Not at all. You're feeding your boy.
What do you want me to do with this onion? Put it in the fridge?
Yes, please.
Okay.
I'll tell you what. I found that I actually like raw onion. So
You like raw onion?
yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. There's nothing wrong with raw onion.
Here, this is dead. Look on the table.
Oh, yeah, okay. Is it dead? Yeah, that's I brought the dead one. Like it's alive when you first hit it. You know.
Oh,
Like,
so
I
alive.
can't figure out which one's the dead one.
I guess I'm not gonna do any more DoorDash tonight.
No, way too late for that.
I need to make $53 more.
Yeah, you will tomorrow.
Tomorrow's Friday, right?
Yeah. Tomorrow's a good day.
I was just about to ask what I've been listening to for the last few. Pride and Prejudice.
Friday is a good day for you, right? It's busy.
Friday is busy. I can make at least $53.
Hell yeah.
But once I make $53, then I can buy some food.
Before the sun goes down.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'll start early. I gotta take you in the morning again.
Yeah.
Oh.
I see her tomorrow morning. So
Wow. All right.
Yeah, she was with a client this morning.
I will be right back. I'm just going to get my drink because I've been reading what I read. 6 chapters. I read 6 chapters. Which isn't bad. I'm just practicing because I love reading. So I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to read. It's good therapy. I'm not running my mouth. I'm getting to know my community.
Yeah.
I'm talking to the people. I'm online.
What? Oh.
I'm talking to my community. And, it was just time. It's really time because, we all come on here and complain and shit like that. 5 people want to join my live over there. I don't. I'm going to get off in a minute, guys. Sorry. Lala, you followed me? Thank you. Thank you, Lala. Thank you. I'm going to follow you back. Brink. Follow you back, sweetheart. Oh, you got a lot of followers. Right on, Chicky. Good job. Thank you very much. And thanks for all the likes. And thanks for listening to me read on TikTok and on YouTube. I love you guys. The Unknown Knows. How long have you been listening to me read in here? I'm an artist. I usually paint. I usually do Micah and Mika. Mika and Micah. It's Mika and Micah. It is Shams from Shams Don't Care's channel. And she and I usually get on and do this little, ranting thing, current events. Talking about, life and mental health. And we tend to spend a lot of time talking about really important things, feelings and humanity and discrimination, all the shit you're not supposed to talk about. We like to talk about that stuff. Pushing. Let me put this over here. So, should I keep reading? Should I keep reading? I guess I should keep reading, huh? Okay, well, let me unplug this. Put you there. So I'm looking at everyone. Okay, so for you guys over here, I have been reading from the beginning. I've been reading from the beginning. I started. I am not reading it for any purpose but entertainment and to practice. I like to read. I actually like to professionally speak, professional speaker. I don't know where to apply it. So anyway, I figured a really good way to practice my public speaking is by reading. And a lot of us don't read enough anymore. And I won't lie, I'm trying to grow my community on TikTok. There's a lot of people on here that I've been following that I enjoy. I'm learning a lot about adult mental health from TikTok. There are a lot of great content creators that are focusing on things that we don't talk about. that are taboo, or or just there's like a huge community of all of us who, I don't know, like feel like weirdos, and we're all like getting together on the internet and making a big force. So anyway,
What did you do with the taco salad?
it's in the refrigerator somewhere. I bought a new one.
Yeah, no, not the big one. Isn't there another one?
No, we used it up.
Oh, okay.
The Ortega got used up.
This is the one I hear.
Yeah, that's the new one. And it tastes good, so. No. Where was I? At 5 o'clock, the two ladies retired to dress, and to 6:30, blah, 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 blah. They think that they're snobs. I have an excessive regard for Jane Bennet. Oh, so what I was saying is I am reading Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I haven't read it since high school, college. It's very good. Jane Austen is a very good writer. So here we go. Anyway, I'm in it. I'm on chapter 6. I'm in chapter 6. So, Darcy, her sister, scarcely less so. And as for Miss Hunt, blah, 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 indolent man. He was an indolent man who lived only to eat, drink, and play at cards. Who was, oh yeah, that was way back there. Way back there. Wow, I got far. Oops, I didn't mean to drop you. And I'm reading. I don't really, I'm not trying to be rude, guys. I'm not trying to be mean.
Hey, don't forget about this.
What is it?
Chicken.
Oh yeah, no. That you can use in those rolls too.
Yeah, no,
That's what I bought it for.
Yeah,
So next time you want to make some chicken wraps, you can use that chicken.
That's what I just reminded you had it because I didn't know if you forgot about it.
Okay. During dinner, Mr. Bennet. I'm reading.
I'll be back. Yeah, sure, you're good.
During dinner, Mr. Bennet scarcely spoke at all. But when the servants were withdrawn, he thought it time to have some conversation with his guest, and therefore started a subject in which he accepted him to shine, by observing that he seemed very fortunate in his patroness, Lady Catherine de Bourgh. Attention to his wishes and consideration for his comfort appeared very remarkable. Mr. Bennet could not have chosen better. Mr. Collins was eloquent in her praise. The subject elevated him to more than usual solemnity of manner, and with a more important aspect he protested that he had never in his life witnessed such behavior in a person of rank, such affability and condescension as he had himself experienced from Lady Catherine. She had been graciously pleased to approve of both the discourses which he had already had the honor of preaching before her. She had also asked him twice to dine. Hi, Jessica. How are you? Hi. Hello. How are you? I hope you're well. I hope everything's going good today for you. I'm reading Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Let's get back to it. She had also asked him twice to dine at the Rosings, and had sent for him only the Saturday before, to make up her pool of quadrille in the evening. Lady Catherine was reckoned proud by many people he knew, but he had never seen anything but affability in her. She had always spoken to him as she would to any other gentleman. She made not the smallest objection to him joining in the society of the neighborhood, nor to his leaving his parish occasionally for a week or two to visit his relations. She had even condensed to advise him to marry as soon as he could, provided he chose with discretion, and had once paid him a visit in his humble parsonage, where she had perfectly approved all the alterations he had been making, and had even vouchsafed to suggest some herself, some shelves in the closets upstairs. That is all very proper and civil, I am sure, said Miss Bennet, and I dare say she is a very agreeable woman. It is a pity that great ladies in general are not more like her. Does she live near you, sir? The garden in which stands my humble abode is separated by a lane from Rosens Park, her ladyship's residence. I think you said she was a widow, sir? Has she any family? She has only one daughter, the heiress of Rosings, and of very extensive property. Ah, cried Miss Bennet, shaking her head. Then she is better off than many girls. And what sort of young lady is she? Is she handsome? She is a most charming young lady indeed. Lady Catherine herself says that in point is truly beauty. Miss de Bourgh is far superior to the handsomest of her sex, because there is that in her features which marks the young woman of distinguished birth. She is unfortunately of a sickly constitution, which has perverted her making that progress in many accomplishments which she could not otherwise have failed off, as I am informed by the lady who superintends her education and who still resides with them. But she is perfectly amiable, and often condescends to drive by my humble abode in her little phaeton and ponies. She has been presented. I do not remember her name among the ladies at court. Her indifferent state of health unhappily prevents her being in town, and by that means, as I told Lady Catherine myself one day, has deprived the British court of its brightest ornament. Her ladyship seems pleased with the idea, and you may imagine that I am happy with every occasion to offer to those little delicate doop-de-doops and doop-de-doop-doops. Hi, Nick, how are you? I am reading Pride and Prejudice. I'm giving everybody a bedtime story. You're in southeastern Minnesota when we're supposed to share. Gotcha. How is the weather in southwestern Minnesota? Was it like spring there today too? What an odd day. I'm thinking that we're going to have a really crazy winter. We are going to have a really crazy winter. Well, I'm very happy that you're here, Nick. Thank you for being here, even though it's so late. I'm giving you guys a bedtime story. We'll call it Bedtime Stories with Micah. And I will always start it after midnight. That's all. If you're bored or tired or lonely or not tired, but don't have anyone to talk to, I will try to come on here every night between midnight and 1 when I can and read you a book. Deal? Deal. I'm trying to pick up my reading skills. How's about it? Anyway. Her ladyship seemed pleased with the idea, and you may imagine that I am happy on every occasion to offer those little delicate compliments which are always accepted to ladies. I have more than once observed to Lady Catherine that her charming daughter seemed born to be a duchess, and that the most elevated rank, instead of grieving her consequence, would be adorned by her. There are the kind of little things which please her ladyship, and it is a sort of attention which I conceive myself particularly bound to pay. You judge very properly, said Miss Bennet, and it is happy for you that you possess the talent of flattering with delicacy. May I ask whether these pleasing attentions proceed from the impulse of the moment, or are the results of previous study? They are chiefly from what is passing at the time, and though I sometimes amuse myself with suggesting and arranging such little elegant compliments as to give them an unstudied an air as possible. Mr. Bennet's expectations were fully answered. His cousin was as absurd as he had hoped, and he had listened to him with the keenest enjoyment, maintained at the same time the most resolution composure of countenance, and except in an occasional glance at Elizabeth, requiring no partner in his pleasure. By tea time, however, the dose had been enough, and Mr. Bennet was glad to take his guest into the drawing room again, and when tea was over, glad to invite him to read aloud to the ladies. Miss Collins readily assessed, and a book was produced, but on beholding it, from everything announced it to be from Circulation Library. He started back and, begging pardon, protested that he never. Give me 1 second. I gotta let Frank outside, guys. Let's go, Frank. Come on. Let's go. Go.
And you stay away from those wine
Go.
barrels. Okay.
Go.
But you're not hearing it, did you?
Go.
So what? These bullets definitely match. They're fired from the gun that killed your brother. The goalie was on that job tonight.
So I'm sorry, but here's the deal with Frank, okay? Like, as soon as I get on the internet, Frankie wants to go outside. I know, poor little Frankie. He's my baby. November's been astonishingly gentle, mild, unusually warm. God has blessed me with this lovely weather. I cannot believe this weather was so incredible today. I mean, it was absolutely fantastic weather. Ab fab, that's what I say. Ab fab. All right, I'll put the book away. You guys want to talk? I really want to get to know the people in my community, you know? I mean, I have quite a few people following me, and I mean, hey, I had a really hard time making friends, so I think it's wicked cool that I get so much support. And you know, I mean, I won't lie. I want to make real content. I got to go get Frank. I'll be right back. No, don't start whining at me. I'm not giving you any more chicken. I'm keeping you guys out. Don't come in here crying at me. I don't want it. No more bitching at me. So actually what happened is we made some chicken quesadillas, and you can't break out chicken when you got dogs around. Dogs and chicken. Okay. It is 1:30 in the morning here, you know. So what time is it in Minnesota? What time is it in Minnesota? Nick, as long as you just get on TikTok. Hawkwind, good morning. The unknown. Hot retarded chicks. Are you still here or did you fall asleep? Because you wanted me to read another chapter, right? Or you didn't? You did or you didn't? You did or didn't? 12:32. Okay, so you're 2 hours behind me. Oh yeah, we hit 68 every day for the past couple of days. Frankie's all better. He went out, did his thing, came back in. Anyway, I don't know what I want to do. I used to think I wanted to be a journalist, and having this outlet to be able to get on the internet and really like be and do whatever you want. I remember when my daughter was really little and she used to watch Nickelodeon, and she'd be like, when I grow up, I'm going to be on TV, Mom. And she was determined. She was in all the plays. We have a community theater. My daughter was in community theater. I mean, community theater was big in my family. My kids, like, this, which is something my daughter threw away, with this right here. This, you see this, you guys? It's a pop-up, okay? This is a little pop-up of the city. Okay, now I grew up in New York City, and my daughter, we grew up. I raised my kids upstate, okay? This right here is something that my daughter looked at every single night and day of her life. She made this. She got it out of, when she went to see Wicked. But let me tell you, this kid, anyway, she had iron balls. This kid did anything, whether she was scared or not. She didn't care. She didn't care if she was afraid. She didn't care if she was intimidated. Her mother, on the other hand, see, I mean, I had so many issues because, I was in foster care and all that stuff. My daughter was very stable. So I secretly a little vicariously through my kid. All the stuff I wanted to do that I was too afraid to do, she did. Like getting into the school plays and, joining the community theater and having all of those theater friends. I think theater people are cool. I'm a painter, I paint. So I always wanted to hang out with the artsy kids, but I have all these like ticks, weird things that always end up making people think I'm a whack job. And they're like, oh, that girl, she's a little strange. I am a little strange. I have absolutely no problem admitting I am a lot strange, but what the you know? Yeah, Nick, do you have any kids yet? I have 3 kids. They're all grown up. 33, 27, 23. My daughter is the baby. And I can honestly say I've never done anything more perfect in my existence besides my perfect children. They are so perfect, it scares me. And the reason why it scares me is because the world is so wicked. The world is so wicked. And I hate to see my kids hurt. Oh, it's like physically, mentally, emotionally, it drives me mad to see my kids hurt, Like, I can't see you cry. Don't cry. Don't hurt yourself. I'm a wicked sensitive. So, Florida. I lived in Florida for about 2 years in 1976 and 77. Me and my very young underage single mother went to Florida, which was probably the biggest mistake of my mom's life because she got herself tied in with some wrong people, and the next thing I know, I was the one locked up. 0 children. Oh, that's silliness. You can't think that way. Psh, don't think that way at all, please. Because can I tell you, there is a huge, ginormous amount of people who got married and procreated based on this programmed concept of romance and things that are human nature, not real kind of bullshit. I truly believe that you need to look at it as, okay, first of all, this place is not a place for kids. My kids struggle every day. They're living in the same dark bullshit that we're living in. And, I feel bad because I can't do anything for them. I feel so handicapped and useless. And their dumb father was so immature that he got himself dead out. And so now we don't have him anymore. And, you end up realizing how important somebody is when they die on you. And so anyway, it's just strange. But just a book a week. I like to read. I have all kinds of books, and it's a pain in the ass to people because I know that it is like whenever I move, there's always my chests, my army chests. I have these big army chests just filled with books. They're like 2 tons of piece, and people hate moving my books. And each time I move, I always am like, you know what? I'm gonna condense my books. I condense them, and then I end up sneaking everything that I condensed with me anyway, because that's one of my ticks. I've gotten much better at it, but definitely I am a book collector and I read books more than once. I read books until the pages are frayed in. I push all the corners in on all the books.
The little Frank's gonna have to have some water. That's what Frank was barking at earlier. That's what Frank was trying to get my attention for. You hear me?
What?
There was no water in their bowl.
Oh, cool.
Fucking bowl was empty.
Oh, well, that's good.
Yeah, that's exactly what he was doing.
Well, cool.
He was smart. I knew he was.
I let him out to poop though too.
I just couldn't figure out what he wanted. I'm so stupid. I didn't even realize the bowl was empty.
I let Frankie out to go doo doo. It's so weird. This whole thing, being a human being, is so weird. This whole experience, just all of it, it's just so weird, you know. What the hell are we doing here? It's temporary, totally temporary. It's just a blink of an eye. Did anyone get a chance to see the moon tonight? Anyone get a chance to take a really good look at the moon tonight? I swear it looked like there's a planet in front of it. It looked like it was like a sliver, you know, it was like the toenail sliver kind of
When they're done, I'll get you one.
moon. But I swear with my glasses on, I got a better picture of it. And when I looked really close, it almost looked like, you know, like when I draw a crest, it's perfect. It looked like something was breaking the line of the crest, another circle on top of it. And, you know, it was shaded out. It was very odd. There's something going on in the Truman sky. This is all just a test. We're all just being tested.
Got a nice cold bottle from my bank right here. Look.
Good. I'm glad you think so. I mean, you know, and you know, there's the other. I mean, if you're too old at this point, but there's always, even if you're single, you know, there's always an opportunity to bring a child into your life. It doesn't have to be a little kid. It could be a young adult or someone. There's someone out there that needs to be connected with, and it could give you those parental feelings that you've never felt before. You know what I mean? You get the parental feelings you've never felt before, and they're there, and you can click them on if you meet the right kid that needs. Shh, come on, please. I'm trying to explain something, and you're in the background. That's all. I would never do that to you.
What? Are you kidding me? You'll never talk to your dog while I'm in the room? That's what you're saying. Come on.